Picture a dense, foggy forest up in Washington state. It's 1997, and the airwaves of a super popular late-night radio show are absolutely crackling, with a story that sounds like it was pulled straight out of a bizarre sci-fi novel. In this explainer, we're going to explore a mystery that completely fractured the reality of a quiet, rural community. A man named Mel Waters called in from Ellensburg, Washington, and started describing something on his property that just defied all logic. He didn't dig up buried treasure. He didn't find ancient artifacts. He found a void, a literal hole in the ground that seemed to have absolutely no end. And, as we unpack the evidence and the claims surrounding this anomaly today, you'll see this wasn't just some weird physical curiosity. It became a massive magnet for the paranormal, a target for federal intervention, and a deeply eerie enigma that still remains unsolved today. To really wrap our heads around the sheer, bizarre nature of this story, we actually have to look at how completely mundane its origins were. For decades, locals had been using this pit on Mel's land as a private, super convenient dump site. I mean, they were tossing literally everything down there. We're talking about old, heavy refrigerators, bags of household trash, even deceased farm animals. But there was one chilling fact that Mel suddenly realized. It's a detail that shifts this whole thing from a quirky local legend to something just deeply unsettling. There was never an echo. Think about that for a second. No matter how large, how heavy, or how metallic the object was, no one ever heard it hit the bottom. You would expect a massive crash, right? Or a thud, or at least the sound of debris tumbling against the dirt walls. But instead, the item simply vanished into absolute unyielding silence. Okay, let's dive into this, because this is where the sheer scale of the mystery absolutely explodes. Mel became totally obsessed with this silent void. He just had to know where the bottom was, so he devised a test. He went out, got a heavy-duty fishing reel, and started lowering high-tensile fishing line straight into the pit. He attached weights to the end to keep it taut, and he just kept unspooling it, day after day after day. Ultimately, he lowered an astonishing 80,000 feet of fishing line into the earth. Just let that unnatural physics sink in for a moment. 80,000 feet of line unspooling endlessly into the dark, and the weight at the end never went slack. It never touched a solid surface. And this brilliantly illustrates just how terrifying and visceral the scale of this claim really is. Look at the comparison here. Mount Everest, the literal tallest peak on our entire planet, reaches roughly 29,000 feet up into the sky. And the deepest man-made hole ever created, the Kola super deep borehole over in Russia, that took scientists and engineers decades of grueling, backbreaking work to drill, and it maxes out at around 40,000 feet. But Mel's hole, a random naturally occurring pit just sitting quietly in a regular Washington backyard, swallowed 80,000 feet of line. That is over 15 miles deep. We're talking about a 15-mile deep void that just sits there, completely silent, totally dwarfing our greatest geographical and engineering landmarks. Section 1. The Resurrected Dog Experiment. Now, stepping into the truly paranormal layer of this, we have to understand the area itself. No birds would ever fly near this pit, and folks reported that radios brought near it played inverted static. So it's within this incredibly unnatural nightmare setting that a local hunter makes a pretty fateful decision. He was totally devastated by the loss of his beloved dog, and finding himself unable to dig a proper grave in that rock-hard dirt, he carried the body right to the edge of the pit and cast it down into the endless darkness. Just a somber, albeit super bizarre, burial at the edge of the abyss. But the story doesn't end with the burial. A few days later, this same hunter was walking through those exact same woods. He hears some rustling. He looks up, and to his absolute shock, a dog is running toward him. And it wasn't just any dog. It was his dog. It was wearing the exact same collar he had thrown into the pit just days prior. But as that initial wave of impossible relief washed over him, it was instantly replaced by a profound, freezing dread. Because this wasn't a miracle. It was an absolute abomination. The dog looked directly at him, yet completely ignored his desperate calls. The hunter described it as acting like a blank, emotionless vessel. It didn't wag its tail. It didn't seem to recognize its master at all. It just kept moving, disappearing silently right back into the thick, dark trees. Which leaves us staring at a deeply, deeply terrifying implication. Did this 15-mile deep void somehow possess the power to resurrect dead tissue? Or perhaps, infinitely more horrifying, did it send something else entirely back up to the surface, just wearing the dog's skin like some kind of biological suit? That absolute uncanny dread is really what elevated Mel's hole from a weird geological oddity to an outright nightmare. Section 2. a geological impossibility. Let's ground this in hard bedrock reality for a second, because geologists who have reviewed Mel's claims are entirely unified on one indisputable fact. This hole is a physical impossibility. Think about it. When you dig 15 miles straight down into the Earth's crust, you are approaching the Earth's mantle. At that extreme depth, the subterranean heat is unimaginably intense, and the sheer crushing pressure of the surrounding tectonic plates is absolutely monumental. Under those conditions, rock doesn't just sit there forming a nice, neat, stable wall. It becomes ductile, it melts, it shifts, and it would instantly collapse in on itself. Scientifically speaking, any open pit at that depth would be squeezed shut in a matter of moments. It simply defies the literal laws of physics and geology for it to exist in our reality. Let's move to and see how this builds. Section 3, the digital erasure. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is if this was all just a physical impossibility or a big hoax, you'd expect it to slowly fade away into internet lore, right? But instead, we see this rapid, almost aggressive corporate and government escalation. Check out this timeline. Immediately following his broadcast on Coast to Coast AM, Mel claimed federal agents descended on Ellensburg. They physically blocked access to his property. Mel was reportedly pulled right out of his home, blackmailed, and handed an ultimatum. He was forced to lease his land to the government for a massive sum of money, but only under the strict condition that he leave the United States immediately. So he relocated to Australia. But the most staggering piece of the cover-up actually came later, when independent researchers and amateur sleuths tried to verify the location using modern satellite imagery on Google Earth. They found the exact coordinates heavily pixelated and completely blacked out. The government, it seems, didn't just seize the land, they literally digitally erased the whole from the map of the world. Section 4. Shadows in Rural Washington. So the crucial point is, Mel Waters basically disappeared from the public eye in the early 2000s, leaving behind nothing but an empty, blacked-out square on a satellite map. But his story, and that sudden, shadowy government intervention, left a deep psychological scar on the local community. That heavy-handed federal presence totally shattered their quiet world trust, leaving the locals constantly wondering what kind of terrifying secret they had been living next to all those years. And even today, the Manitosh Ridge area remains a hotspot of dread. Hikers exploring the deep woods frequently report this lingering heaviness. They stumble into specific pockets of the forest where compasses just inexplicably spin out of control. Expert trackers note that wild animals flatly refuse to walk on certain trails, completely bypassing massive sections of the woods. And most chillingly of all, people still report walking into areas characterized by an unnatural, suffocating silence, a place where the wind suddenly stops blowing entirely, and if you shout into the trees, your voice yields absolutely zero echo. Ultimately, we are left staring into the dark. Was Mel Waters simply an incredibly gifted storyteller who managed to pull off one of the greatest hoaxes in modern history? Or did he accidentally stumble upon a subterranean anomaly, some kind of impossible terror in reality that the government so desperately needed to hide from us? We honestly may never have the definitive answer, but it definitely leaves you with a chilling thought to carry with you the next time you find yourself wandering a little too far off the trail. If you are ever exploring the deep, untouched wilderness, and you happen to come across a dark pit in the earth, a place where the wind suddenly dies and your voice doesn't echo at all, will you turn around and run? Or will you be brave enough to look inside?